The title of the message is Two Kinds of Wisdom. Two kinds of wisdom. James chapter 3, beginning in verse 13, down through the end of the chapter. Hope that you follow along. It says, "Who among you is wise and understanding? Let him show by his good behavior his deeds in the gentleness of wisdom. But if you have bitter jealousy and selfish ambition in your heart, do not be arrogant and so lie against the truth. This wisdom is not that which comes down from above, but is earthly, natural, demonic. For where jealousy and selfish ambition exist, there is disorder in every evil thing. But the wisdom from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, reasonable, full of mercy and good fruits, unwavering, without hypocrisy. And the seed, whose fruit is righteousness, is sown in peace by those who make peace." One of Jesus' most famous, familiar stories involves two men who both built a house. And when they finished building, both of those houses looked the same from the outside. You really couldn't tell any difference in those houses. That is, until the first big storm came. And then the difference was evident. One of the houses withstood the storm with no damage. But the other house shook and it shuddered and it eventually collapsed. And Jesus explained the difference. He said one of those houses was built on a foundation of solid rock, but the other house was built on a foundation of sand. Jesus called the builder who built on solid rock wise, and he called the builder who built on sand foolish. And so one of the lessons of that story for us is that the stability of our life depends on what we build our life on our foundation. And Jesus points out how important it is to build on wisdom. That's why the Bible talks so much about wisdom and how to live a life of wisdom. You know, there are over 300 references to wisdom in just the Old Testament. There are 100 references to wisdom in only the book of the Proverbs. The book of James has been called the New Testament Proverbs because there's so much instruction here about wisdom and how to live a life of wisdom. Understand that wisdom is not the same thing as intelligence. Wisdom is not the same thing as education. Wisdom is not the same thing as simply knowledge. Do you know that not everybody who is smart is wise? Do you know that not everyone who has a college degree or 2 or 3 is wise? Wisdom is not always related to our IQ or our ACT score or our GPA. That's not always connected to wisdom. Somebody said there's a lot of really smart fools running around today. That simply means that they don't have wisdom. They don't understand wisdom. Wisdom is the ability to live a life that's pleasing to God. Wisdom is the ability to take the knowledge that you have acquired and apply that into life so that your life pleases God and your life gives glory to God. That is what wisdom is and what wisdom does for us. But here's the thing, not everything that claims to be wisdom is really wisdom. James would say that there's this thing called earthly wisdom and there is this thing called godly wisdom, and they are not the same thing. You go back to Jesus' story, I imagine that both of those men believed that they were building wisely. Both of those men thought they were wise, but both of those men were not wise. I don't imagine any of us gets up in the morning and sets out to be foolish. But yet some of the things that we think is wise is not necessarily wise. And so there is characteristics that distinguish worldly wisdom from godly wisdom. And that's what James is talking about here. How do we know the difference? How do we know that this thing called wisdom that we're following is the right kind of wisdom, is true wisdom from God? How do we know that we're living and pursuing the right kind of life? Well, that's what James helps us with. First of all, he talks about worldly wisdom. I want you to see that. He talks about worldly wisdom. And he tells us what it looks like, and he tells us what it produces or results in, and he tells us where to find it, where it comes from. And so that's the outline that I want you to see as I go through the message this morning. First of all, what does worldly wisdom look like? What does worldly wisdom look like? James does not give us a textbook definition as such of worldly wisdom, but he tells us what it looks like. And so when we see someone or ourselves living a certain way and doing certain things, there are certain characteristics about that that tells us that it's worldly wisdom at work and not true godly wisdom. And so we would identify worldly wisdom, watch this, church, not by what someone says, but by what someone does. You know, James is big on don't tell me, rather show me. And so just because someone tells you or you think you're following true wisdom, that's not the deciding factor. It is, what does your life look like, and what does my life look like? And so that's what he wants us to see here. In verse 14, he begins to describe this wisdom that is not really wisdom at all. And he gives us some characteristics of what it looks like so that we can look for it in our own lives and we can look for it in others. Let me caution you this morning that as I go through these characteristics of worldly wisdom, don't think about someone else that you know that lives like that. Think about your own life and make sure you're not living like that. Can I give that challenge to all of us? And so the first characteristic that he gives of someone living by worldly wisdom is that they will have this bitter jealousy in their heart. Do you see that there in verse number 14? If you have bitter jealousy, that's a sign. That's a characteristic or a trait that you're living by something that is not true godly wisdom, but rather is worldly wisdom. Bitter jealousy in your heart that drives you or motivates you to act in a certain way. Remember, like every sin, jealousy starts in the heart. Jealousy starts in our heart and then produces an action. And if I have this jealousy in my heart, the word have here means that I harbor it, right? We're all going to be jealous at times, but what do I do with that? Do I deal with that jealousy, or do I harbor it? Do I feed it? Do I nurse it? Do I give it encouragement to stay in my heart? See, that's the key. And if I keep it in my heart, it's just going to build, and it's eventually going to produce this bitterness that will eat me up from the inside. And let me tell you, church, that's a bad condition to be in. If you are a follower of Jesus, you cannot allow jealousy to build in your heart until you are bitter towards someone. Bitter jealousy means that I envy what somebody else has. You know that. You know what jealousy is. I'm envious. I'm jealous of what someone has that I don't have, and here's the key, I want it. I want it. And if I allow that envy of something that I don't have to build and build in my heart, eventually I will take some action. I will do something sinful in order to try to have that thing, right? I can feel jealousy in my heart and deal with it and confess it before God. But if I let it build until it drives me to act, then I've got a problem. Maybe it's money or possessions that we're jealous of that someone else has. Maybe it's a title or a job or popularity. And that jealousy just grows and grows, and it will eventually cause me to do something sinful, something I would not ordinarily do. And I'll find a way to justify it. And I'll say that the ends justify the means because I want it so badly. And so I ask you, do you ever find yourself jealous of what someone else has? Some physical thing or a position or popularity? Do you ever find yourself envious? I would say to you and to me be very careful of where that might lead you. Be very careful of where that might take you. That's a sign of following worldly wisdom. Here's another one. He gives us another characteristic. Are you looking at this one? He says, also we're to look for selfish ambition. Selfish ambition. You see that in verse 14? That means that I only live for myself. It means that I'm out to gratify myself and promote myself above all else. That self is ruling everything in my life. We have this running joke in my small group Sunday school class. We talk about sin and obstacles to our spiritual growth, and we say, well, what causes that? And eventually our discussion usually gets back to, well, it's just self. It's self. That's my real problem. Do you know that's my real problem spiritually is self? Is that your real problem too, is self? If your life and everything in your life is all about you, that's a sign that you're living by worldly wisdom. Because worldly wisdom, listen, the world around us is all about me, 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 and promoting self, self, self. That's a sign of the world's influence on my life and heart. That's a sign I'm living by worldly wisdom. The next characteristic that he gives us is arrogance. You know what that is, right? To boast and to brag and to call attention to yourself, the opposite of humility. And James, I think, would say to us, arrogance has no place in our life as a follower of Jesus. Arrogance has no place in our life. And if you find yourself leaning toward arrogance, usually, by the way, it's somebody else that recognizes it in you before you see it. But that's a sign that you're living according to worldly wisdom. And then one more characteristic of worldly wisdom, if you see it there in verse 14, to lie against the truth. To lie against the truth. I think that means the truth of the Word, right? I think that means the truth of the Word. If I take the truth of the Word and I live in such a way that denies that this is the truth, then I'm lying against the truth. I'm lying against the truth of the Word. And it doesn't matter if I say I believe it. What really matters is, do I live like I believe it, right? Our actions make liars out of a lot of us. We can say, boy, you know, I believe this Bible cover to cover, Mr. Collins, like you do. I believe this Bible cover to cover. But if I'm not living it, James would say, you're lying against the truth because your life doesn't back that up. And no matter if you think you're being wise or not, no matter if I claim to be a wise man before God, if I'm not living according to the truth of the Word, I'm lying against the truth, and that's a sign that I'm not in a right relationship with God. How do I know that I'm living by worldly wisdom? Well, I can ask myself these simple questions. Am I motivated by jealousy? Am I driven by selfish ambition to where it's all about me? Am I all about myself and totally self-absorbed? Am I arrogant rather than humble? Do my lips say one thing and my life say something different? If the answer is yes to any of those, then I'm probably following worldly wisdom, which is not wisdom at all. That's what worldly wisdom looks like. The second thing about worldly wisdom is, what does it produce? What's the result or the consequences of worldly wisdom? And if you look at the end of verse 16, you see it, and it's a terrible thing. He says, where all of this is going on, do you see it in verse 16? Where all of this is going on, there is disorder and every evil thing. What happens when I live by worldly wisdom? Let me tell you, chaos and confusion and disorder and sin and evil. Where do I see chaos and evil and disorder and confusion? Watch me. In every part of my life. Everywhere there's a relationship in my life, if I'm living by worldly wisdom, there's going to be disorder and confusion and chaos and evil in my home and in my family and in my workplace and in all of my relationships, and maybe for this discussion here in the church. Remember, James was writing this to people in a church. He was writing to individual local churches. And he would say, if you allow jealousy and envy and bitterness and selfish ambition to run rampant in your church, then what you're going to have in your church is chaos and disorder and every kind of evil thing. When people in the church are jealous of other people in the church, there'll be conflict and chaos. When Christians, when we're selfish and we get wrapped up in our own ego and we insist on our own way, there's going to be chaos and conflict in all of our relationships. That's just a reality. So living by worldly wisdom produces nothing good. It produces nothing good, nothing that honors God. So where does it come from? What does it look like? What does it produce? Where does it come from? That's a very easy one. Look in verse 15. He said, this wisdom is not from above, all right? So we can rule out that it comes from God. It's not from above, but it is earthly, natural, and demonic. Earthly, natural, and demonic. What that means is, watch me, if you want to find the source of worldly wisdom, look at your own flesh. Look at your own flesh. Where does this idea of living for self come from? Well, it comes from my flesh. Where does this idea of arrogance come from? It comes from my flesh. Where does this idea of living and being driven by jealousy come from? It comes from my flesh. My flesh that's been perverted and twisted by the fall, by sin. You don't have to look far for worldly wisdom. Just look around you and look within you. Listen, hear me now, church. If you find yourself just living the way your flesh desires to live, you have found worldly wisdom. If you never say no to your fallen flesh, you are following worldly wisdom. You don't have to go out there looking for the world. The world is closer than you think. And if you don't deny your flesh and live according to the truth of God, you're just following worldly wisdom because it comes from within you. Just ignore God and His Word, and you'll be following worldly wisdom. And so, that's what worldly wisdom looks like. You've seen the characteristics. That's what it produces. You don't want that. You don't want what it produces in your life. Some of you are living in that right now, and you don't want it. And that's where you find it. You find it within. That's worldly wisdom. He then tells us about godly wisdom. He tells us about wisdom from above, he said. And what he would say to us is, godly wisdom, just like worldly wisdom, is better demonstrated than it is defined. Remember, again, James is more about the do than he is the say. James would say, don't tell me that you're a wise man. Show me that you're a wise man. Don't tell me that you're living according to godly wisdom. Show me by your life that you're living according to godly wisdom. And so what are the characteristics? How do we know we're really living according to godly wisdom? He gives us 7 characteristics. I'll go through them real quickly. The first one and the most important one, if you look in verse 17, here's the beginning of these characteristics, okay? He says, wisdom from above is first pure. So godly wisdom is characterized by purity, by a pure life. And he says first pure. And the word first doesn't, watch me, it doesn't necessarily mean first in a list. It means first in priority. That's the word. It means first in importance. And so what James says is the most important thing that's going to be true about you if you're living according to godly wisdom is you're going to live a morally pure life. Don't live a life of moral impurity and then claim to be following godly wisdom, because that won't track. First and foremost, James says, the most important evidence of godly wisdom is that you're going to be living a life of moral purity, free from moral stain. The word means originally somebody who flees from pollution. If there's something dirty and staining and not good, smelly and dirty, you got my picture? Somebody who flees away from that and wants to get as far away from that as they can. That's the description of a morally pure person. I don't want to get close to that because I'm afraid that stain will get on my life. I shrink away from it. listen to me real carefully, church, and I've preached this to myself already. How we treat sin is a huge indication of whether we're living by godly wisdom or not. How we treat sin in our life is an indication of our purity. If you try above all else to avoid sin and to remove yourself from sin, if you hate sin in your life, if you're repulsed by it, that's pretty good evidence that you're living according to godly wisdom. However, if you think of sin as something that you can dabble with and play around with and have a closer relationship with and just confess it later on, then you're not living according to godly wisdom. You're not living a life of moral purity. Sin for us, for you and me, should be something that we avoid at all costs. The Puritan John Owen said that we better be killing sin or sin will be killing us. That should be our attitude towards sin. And if it's not, then I'm not living a life of moral purity. It's first pure. And then he says it's peaceable. Do you see that in your Bible? The next characteristic of godly wisdom is to live peaceably. Person living by godly wisdom loves peace, has a peaceful spirit. That means he doesn't love conflict and division. This person is not always looking for an argument or a fight or something to get embroiled in. We're peaceable when we're living by godly wisdom. Now, that doesn't mean we compromise the truth. That doesn't mean we back down from biblical truth and theological truth. It just means that in insignificant things, we don't always have to have a fight going on. I don't love turbulence. I don't love conflict. We don't love to have something going all the time. We probably all know, and I don't name names out loud at least, we all probably know people who seem to thrive on conflict. You maybe work with them or they're in your family. Hopefully they're not married to them and in your house, right? But there are people who seem to thrive on conflict. I don't get that. I go as far away from conflict as I can. You can ask the people that I serve with, that they'll tell me that you go too far to avoid conflict. I do. But I don't want conflict. I like peace, right? But we know people who seem to love that. I don't understand that. That's not wise living. Jesus said, blessed are the peacemakers, right? Do you remember that in the beginning? Blessed are the peacemakers. He did not say, blessed are the pot stirrers, right? Peaceful. Then he says it's gentle. See that in the text? A gentle person is displaying the fruit of godly wisdom. That means non-combative and not quarrelsome. It specifically, I'm trying to avoid sneezing, it specifically refers to somebody who's been hurt. Listen, somebody who's been hurt and they have every reason to get even and they don't. You hear that? Somebody who's been hurt, they've been offended, they've been hurt in some way, taken advantage of, and they have every right to get even. And you know what our world says? Do it. Go for it. You got every right. But a gentle person says, no, I'm not going to get even. I've got every right to, and I've got the ability to, and I'm just not going to do it. What happens when you're in that situation? Somebody hurts you, you're in the right and they're in the wrong, not just in your mind, but in any person's mind, and you have the right to get even with them, and you maybe have the opportunity to get even with them. What do? Do you fire back with both barrels of righteous indignation? Or do you understand that the person who has hurt you is as frail and as fallen as you are? And that they have sinned against you, but you're just as likely to sin against somebody. And you refuse to get even because of that. You treat them with grace and mercy. Gentleness is a rare quality these days. We don't tout gentleness anymore because we think of it as weakness. We admire tough and aggressive and getting even and showing strength and retribution and revenge. So to have the right to fight back and not do it, that shows real wisdom. And by the way, the epitome of that was Jesus. Jesus was gentle. That doesn't mean he was weak. It doesn't mean he was less of a man. It means he was so much of a man that when people insulted him and spit on him and beat him and hung him on a cross, he could have went like that and wiped every one of them out, but he didn't. That is gentleness. And that's what we ought to operate out of if we're wise. The next characteristic is we're reasonable. Reasonable. That's rare these days too. One translation here has open to reason. It means, now hear me dear church, don't lose me in the minutia here. This means that we can be persuaded to change our mind if we're confronted with the truth. It means that I've made my mind up about an issue or a person, but if somebody tells me something different that is the truth, I'm willing to change my mind. I am open to persuasion. It means I don't get defensive or angry when somebody disagrees with me. I don't get angry when somebody questions me. Yeah, preacher, are you sure about that? I'm just not sure that's the right way to go. Well, that's not being reasonable. Here's what being reasonable looks like. Well, you tell me your side of it. You tell me things that I don't know, and maybe I need to be enlightened here. And if they know more than I do, then I'm saying, you know what, you're right, and I'm willing to change my mind. Do you know people who are not willing to change their mind no matter how wrong? Don't name names. Do you know people who are not willing to change their mind no matter how wrong they are? And if you confront them or question them, they go, you know people like that? Do you work with people like that? Do you live with people like that? Listen, don't be like that, because that is not living according to godly wisdom. A godly, wise person says, I will change my mind if you will show me the truth and how I'm wrong. That's what James says. Be open to persuasion. Open to persuasion. And especially don't be that person in church and in your relationship. None of us is always right. You hear that? None of us is always right, no matter what your husband says. We should always be willing to listen to others and change our mind if needed. Somebody said, only a fool is not persuadable. If you're not persuadable, maybe that's you. The next characteristic, we're almost done, is that this person is full of mercy and good fruit. Mercy. What's mercy? Watch me, church. Mercy is knowing about somebody's bad situation and doing something about it. Mercy is not just feeling bad about it. Mercy is doing something about it, right? If I come across somebody comes into my life and they're in a difficult situation, I say, man, I sure do feel sorry for you. I'm just brokenhearted about this. And you can't help them and you don't. That's not showing mercy. That's not showing mercy at all. It's not about what I feel, it's about what I do. If there's no action, then there's no mercy. And James says, when you treat people with mercy, you're demonstrating that you're living by godly wisdom. And resist the temptation. Hear me, church. Resist the temptation to treat people like you think they deserve to be treated. Well, you know, they've messed up. They've really blown it, and this is not their first time, so they're just going to have to learn their lesson. Yes, people mess up, and yes, they need to learn, and they need to change their behavior, but let's not put ourselves in the place of God and put ourselves in the place of teaching them a lesson. We just need to show mercy, because let's be honest, let's be thankful that God doesn't treat us according to what we deserve, but God gives us mercy instead. And so we should show mercy to other people. Somebody said that showing mercy is simply doing unto others what God has already done to us. He's shown mercy. And then the next characteristic is that we're unwavering. Do you see that in your text? I want you to see it. Don't just take my word. Unwavering means to be steady and consistent to our faith and to the Lord and to His church and to His people. That means I make a commitment and I stick with it. I don't compromise. I don't back up. It might be hard to follow Jesus and hard to get along and hard to keep going, but I do it anyway. I am unwavering. And then the last characteristic says is without hypocrisy. You know what hypocrisy is, right? Literally, the word means to put on a mask and pretend to be something that you're not. It was used in drama, the world of drama in the first century. We're all like that a little bit, aren't we? We like to put our mask on. Do you like to put your mask on when you come to church? Do you like to put your mask on when you're around other Christians and maybe you pretend that you're something that you're not? Pretending with spiritual things is not wise. It's not godly wisdom. It's when I know how I am in my heart, but I pretend to be something else. Our older two granddaughters are here today, and we'll go home, we'll go eat lunch after the service. You say it can't happen fast enough. But after lunch, you know what they're going to say? They're going to say, Grandpa, let's play pretend. Can we play pretend? Pretend. Grandpa, pretend that you're a monster and you chase us, right? In our spiritual life, we don't want to pretend. We want to be without hypocrisy, right? We want to be transparent and open. That's what godly wisdom looks like. Does that describe your life? If it does, then what does that produce? If you look down in verse 18, it says the result or the fruit is righteousness. Righteousness here means a right relationship. Do you know what happens in my relationships with people when I live according to these characteristics? Do you know what happens? Things are right. They're good. There's peace. There's smoothness there. There's not conflict and chaos, but there is righteousness in my relationships toward these people. If you find yourself in a relationship with somebody that's operating according to godly wisdom, that will be vastly different than you're surrounded by people who are living according to worldly wisdom. Because those worldly wisdom folks, watch me, they love conflict, and they're going to bring it into your life. But people who are living according to godly wisdom, they want right relationship. That's what it produces. That's what it produces. Where does it come from? That's the last part of this, right? See in your outline? Where does it come from? Does it just happen naturally? Are we born with godly wisdom? Well, James says in chapter 1, verse 5, all the way back several weeks ago, that if anybody lacks wisdom, let him ask of God, and God will give it to him generously and without reproach. If you need godly wisdom, you know what the first thing you ought to do? Ask God for it. Ask God for it. Even if you think you're fairly wise, ask Him for more. And James 1:5 said, He's going to give it to you without reproach. That means He's not going to do it begrudgingly. He's going to do it generally. God's not going to look at you and say, well, here we go. I got to give Him some more. He's going to say, no, I want to give Him more so that He can live a life that glorifies me. That's where we get it. That's where we get it. We get it from asking God for it and filling our life with the truth of the Word. So let me ask you, what does the evidence of your life show about the kind of wisdom you're following? What does the outward display of your life say about the wisdom that you live by? Are you the more chaos and confusion and every evil thing kind of person? Is your life motivated by your jealousy and your envy and your arrogance and your pride? Or have you got that reasonable quality? Have you got that persuadable, that easy to get along with, that gentle, that pure? Is that what characterizes your life? You know. You know. You don't need somebody to tell you. You know. So I challenge you this morning. If you've got more of this, the worldly wisdom, than this, then I would say you need to ask God to give you this. And He will. He will give it to you generously. And then your life can reflect all of those things that leads to righteous relationships. I want you to bow with me, if you would. Father, I know we all stand in need of more wisdom that comes from You. For most of us, our life is a mixture of living for the world and self and living for You. And God, we want more of Your wisdom that comes down from above. We want more of the wisdom that leads to right relationships and peace and gentleness, humility. We want more of that, God. So every sincere believer here this morning, God, that is asking you for that today, would you give the way your word has promised you would, generously, abundantly, without reproach? God, would you do that? And God, for those who are living according to their flesh, the way they want to live, would you convict them of that, show them that that's only going to lead to chaos and confusion? God, would you show us where we are right now and where you want us to be? We ask that. We'll listen, we'll obey, we'll do what you ask us this morning as we wait before you. Father, please speak to our hearts. We ask that.